people that have bought brand new telescopes or tried to via the internet. Right now, a purchase of telescopes is pretty difficult because there's been such an influx of people buying telescopes during these last several months. To get these parts, because a lot of the stuff does come from China. Let's just be real about that, especially with these telescopes. So getting telescopes has been a difficult task. But some people have got them. Some, as I said, have had them and have decided to break them out. So you bought a telescope. Now what? Well, what I wanted to do this evening was go through what I can to tell you about how to get familiar with your telescope and get it set up so it can track the night sky and do the different things that, you know, the advertising told you that it could do. Now, there's one problem with that. I want everybody to be aware of this and to manage some expectations, if you will. And that's that there's a lot of different telescopes out there. There's tabletop Dobsonians. There's Newtonian telescopes that also are Dobsonian telescopes that vary in size. They can be in telescopes, which are a push-to type of telescope. There's go-to telescopes. There's alt-azimuth mount telescopes, and there's equatorial gem mount telescopes. German equatorial mount is what the GEM, G-E-M, stands for. So to be able to go through, and I should backtrack and say also that the vendors, whether it's Celestron or Meade or Orion or any of these different companies that make these telescopes, they all have different ways for how you're going to be able to set up your telescope. So I can't go through, unfortunately, in the course of one, talk in one evening, and it's especially difficult, of course, online and doing this virtually. I can't give the instructions for every single telescope that's out there on how to set it up and use it. But we're going to do our best. And so I have got some good information to share with you. And let me close this screen real fast, and then we'll get started. Okay, I didn't kill anybody. They all still there. All right. So what we're going to talk about is setting up and using that new telescope. Oh, got to play the video on this. All right. So the different telescopes I want to go through. One of the types of telescopes we have is a manual pointing telescope. So a manually pointing telescope doesn't have any electronics in it. It's one of the types of telescopes, a basic recommendation that we make for brand new people into astronomy. If they've already had some experience with binoculars, this is just another pointing instrument that they can point the telescope up to the night sky and look at the different objects. Now, there's pros and there's cons to having that type of telescope, and I'm not going to go into it with this talk here. But one of the things that is a pro that I will talk about is all that you have to do with this type of telescope is take it outside and put it on the ground. Preferably, you have level ground that you can place the telescope on, so that when it rotates around it's not going to fall over. You got these larger telescopes like the one on the right there. That's a Dobsonian mount telescope. When they place on the ground, if it has a high tilt, it'll have a tendency to want to tilt over when you try to move it around. The telescope on the right, as I said, is a Dobsonian mount telescope. And if you look really closely on the get my little drawing tool out here. If you look really closely around this circle right here, there's a couple of little white pads. Those are Teflon pads that they just slip and slide in a rotation on that pad. And then there's a spring right there that you can separate the tube of the telescope from the base of the telescope for transporting it and storage and things like that. This is one of my favorite types of telescopes. I have a 10-inch version of this telescope, and it just sits straight up and down under a cover in my garage, and I can just roll it out into my driveway, and I'm observing within a few seconds. So I really enjoy that. And this is what is also referred to as an alt-azimuth type of mount. And the reason that is that you're moving the elevation or altitude of the telescope different than you're moving the azimuth. And the azimuth, or the that rotates around north, south, east, west, and points to different areas in the sky in the cardinal directions. That also sits on Teflon plates in most cases, and it's kind of like a lazy Susan in your kitchen, if you will. So you move those two axes in a separate activity, in a separate motion. But what you have with the other type of telescope that I have over here on the left, this is a German equatorial mount telescope. And this type of telescope, you'd want to set it up so that it's oriented towards the North Star. So a couple of things with that is that you'll see this, I put an arrow here to kind of ease it. There's a little place that is usually a hole in the telescope, not always, but for ease of finding the North Star and getting this alignment done correctly, there's usually a cap that you can take off there. And some of the manufacturers, you have to tilt this this bar so that it's 90 degrees or horizontal with the ground, so that that hole is exposed, and you'll unscrew the cap at this end down here, and you could sight for Polaris through the telescope. Now, why do you need to do that? Well, you don't really need to do that with a manual pointing telescope. You can still go out and have a good time looking at the night sky, but if you do orient your telescope just at least in a general direction of the northern star, what that's going to do for you is that when you have this aligned in north, this axis of rotation of the telescope is going to follow the ecliptical plane. So how the stars track through the sky, you're going to be able to move the mount only in the one axis and not two separate axes. So it makes it easier to move your telescope around to find the objects that you have. Overall, the alt-azimuth telescopes are easy for you to move it around when you're doing it manually, but the German equatorial mounts are going to be better for when you get into computerized telescopes that maybe you want to go further into doing astrophotography or something like that, which is well beyond this talk here. And I guess maybe I have to do this. Okay. So let me quickly go through the computerized telescopes. Sorry about that. On the computerized telescopes, let's talk about how you go and set it up for the first time. That is what I said my talk was going to be about. So I've got some slides to cover that. So I happen to have the Celestron mounts, shown in these pictures here, but there's other manufacturers, Meade, for example. They all have different setup requirements. So I can't really tell you, okay, for the Celestron, it's this way, and for the Meade, it's this way. I could, but then it'd be a really long talk because I'd have to look every single telescope, maybe a little bit different in what their particular requirements for setting up are. And that's especially the case with the computerized ones. So what you're going to want to do is you do want to check and read your owner's manual for setup of the telescope. Some of these telescopes with the alt-azimuth, they may require you to point to north, or to place your tube of the telescope where it's horizontal. There's all sorts of different kind of idiosyncrasies, and so you have to look in your manual on what your particular telescope requires you to do. But basically what you're doing in any case when you start out is you're starting with a 0 point of reference for the computer to know where to point in the night sky. That's the most important thing to know. So, and I'm assuming for people with computerized telescopes that they are using the getting a telescope or have a telescope that has this go-to type of alignment that needs to be done, where you put certain information into the telescope and then it'll automatically track and point to the different stars in the sky, and that's what they do. So when I talk about the go-to tracking of the sky, that's going to work best if your telescope is level, first of all. And again, this isn't like my number one thing. Make sure your telescope is level. It's not like that. It's as long as it's fairly reasonably level, it's okay. But I personally bring out a little level with me to make sure that I'm as level as possible, because the more level it is, it'll track correctly. Versus if it's not level, it'll track off of the stars over time. So the more level you are, the better success you'll have through the evening of maintaining tracking of the stars once you've done that initial alignment. If not, you start losing tracking of the stars, you got to go back and do this alignment process again. And it's just easier to do it right the first time and have it just work for you all evening. Though if you're out for 8 hours or something in the night sky, staying up all night, you might have to do these alignments more than once. And but we're going to help you minimize that as much as possible. So the first thing, and probably the most important thing in my mind, because I've made this mistake in various ways, I don't know how many times, and it's easy to make and continue to make these mistakes from time to time, is you've got to make sure that you have the date, the time zone that you're in, and daylight savings time, yes or no, set correctly in your hand controller of your telescope. If you don't have that set correctly, you're not going to be pointing correctly to the stars. So I even have an attachment device, something you can buy extra for my telescope that I have, that's a GPS. And that GPS, I think of like in my car, that I don't have to worry about time zone and mountain time, daylight savings time. It automatically makes all those adjustments, I think. But it doesn't on a telescope. So you have to go in manually and enter in that daytime time zone, daylight savings time manually, even if it has a GPS on there, because the GPS doesn't know that stuff. You got to tell the telescope that stuff is there. And then it'll go from there and give you correct time with the GPS satellites, which is great. And it'll give you latitude, longitude. If you don't have the GPS device, you're going to have to get latitude and longitude from, you can use Google Maps, or you could use some different apps on your iPhone or your Android phone. And but you're going to want to find out, how do I get my latitude and longitude for the different places that I go to and set up my telescope? Whether it's my backyard or you travel someplace, you're going to need latitude and longitude for setting this up. Then you want to choose an alignment option. Again, in the telescopes, there are going to be different alignment options and tracking. Are you tracking the moon? If you're tracking the moon, you're going to want to set your settings for what am I thinking? Not sidereal, but I think there's a lunar. There certainly is on most telescopes, there's a solar. If you put a solar filter on the front of your telescope and you're tracking the sun, there's a solar tracking, and then there's sidereal, which is tracking the stars. So you want to go in and look at the different tracking options in your software on your hand controller and make sure that it's set for what it is that you're looking at, and get that set up, and then we're pretty much ready to go. And you can go in and choose your alignment option, and what that is you'll typically select like a 2-star alignment. You could do a quick align, but it won't last as long on tracking the stars. It won't be as effective at tracking as if you were to use a 2-star alignment or something like that. There might be some that have even a 3-star alignment. So when you select that, then it'll say point, press enter, and it'll automatically go point to that particular star. Now, how do you know that that bright star that it's pointing towards is, let's say that it says go point, just for the sake of this discussion, that it says go point at Arcturus. Well, how do you know what star is Arcturus? If you're a beginner, especially, and even some of us more advanced astronomers, some of these stars that they use for navigation, for doing an alignment on these telescopes, are not ones that are just common household names. Akshnar, and there's all sorts of Zubinel, Janubi, and all sorts of different named stars out there. So if you're like me, and the very first telescope you bought was a computerized telescope, and you read the ads and they said plop it down on the ground and it'll automatically go and point at the night sky, well, you got to do this alignment first. And the very first thing it says is go point at some weird star that you never heard of before. So what do you do? So I recommend they use a star atlas. When I recommend that people buy a telescope, I also recommend that they buy a star atlas along with it. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit into a later part of my talk here, but the important thing is a star atlas. Think of the star atlas as your GPS for your car, or your Rand McNally, atlas for your trip that you're going to take up to Yellowstone. Now, I'm going to go up to Yellowstone. When I go up to Yellowstone, I want to know, what are the roads that I need to take to be able to get there. So by the same virtue, the stars in the sky are going to be listed and labeled. I know what towns I'm going to go through. I know what stars are by name in virtue of having a star atlas. So that's kind of to me, that's a big deal. Now, whether your star atlas is a paper one, or there's several different star atlases that are available that have the star names in them that you can get off of use on your iPhone, on an iPad, on a tablet, Android tablet, or an Android phone, a Google phone. There's lots of different star atlases out there. You just need one to know whether the star that you're pointing at to do this alignment is the correct one or not. Because if you're not pointing to the correct star and trying to do an alignment, then you just told the computer, hey, I'm on this star, when you really weren't. So, but typically it'll be pointed generally in only to the bright star that's in that region when you select it. So just be aware of that. The other thing that you want to do, and this is a common mistake that a lot of people will do, was they'll use their finder scope to do that alignment, because and we'll get into setting up your telescope and doing setting up the finder scope to work and everything. But a finder scope is going to be something like 0 magnification or 10 times magnification at the most, typically. No more than that in a general sense. Well, what I recommend is that you actually use your eyepieces on your telescope to do your alignments that you do. And when you use that, I recommend that you ultimately use the highest magnification eyepiece that you're going to use in observing for that night. So let's say, and most newcomers to astronomy will have 2 eyepieces. They'll typically have something in the range of 20 to 25 millimeters, and they'll have another eyepiece that is in the range of, say, 14 to 9 millimeters, somewhere in there. So your highest magnification is going to be the one with that smaller number. So what I do is when I go and point to that very first star, and you probably aren't going to be accurately pointed the very first time, when you point, because you just put the telescope down on the ground, you just put in the date, time zone, and all that other information. When it points to that first star, usually it's off by a little bit. So you're going to have to move your telescope around with the little arrow buttons to get it aligned to that first star. So, but when you do that, start with the finder scope, get it in the crosshairs to where it's going to be in your eyepiece. Then start with the the low magnification eyepiece at 25 to 20 millimeter eyepiece. And then once you get it as centered as you can in that eyepiece, then you can go and go to the higher magnification eyepiece and get it centered even more into your telescope. I actually go, me personally, I even go one step beyond that, not suggesting it for a beginner, not necessary really, but I actually have an eyepiece that has a crosshairs that's lit up with a red LED in the center of it, so that I can get my eyes. Sometimes what I perceive as the center of my eyepiece isn't the center of the eyepiece. It's just what my eye perceives to be center. So having a what's called a reticuled eyepiece, I can center the star into that eyepiece, into what is the real true center. It's centered every single time that I'm doing it, that alignment. Again, not necessary, but and especially if you're going and using your maximum magnification eyepiece that you have to get that centered, you're going to be very precise in that setup. And then the final thing that you want to do is you want to, the last thing that you do when you do an alignment of the stars, at least on the next star telescopes, the Celestron telescopes, that might be true with the Meade as well, is you want to remove the backlash in the gear teeth in the gears of the motors that run these telescopes. And the way that you do that in the Celestron anyway is the last keys that you want to press in your arrow keys is the right key and the up key. So you do right and up and make sure that it's centered with the right and the up keys, getting it into that center position, and that'll be precisely centered for that alignment. Then you go and say, hey, I'm done doing alignment, and it'll say, okay, next alignment star. And you go and repeat that process. The second time through, it should be much closer to the star that is selected in the sky. So, and then with that, at least on the next star telescopes, I'm not a Meade expert, and maybe any of our other individuals online that have other types of telescopes that can provide advice on how they set up their all azimuth computerized telescopes. But on the Celestron telescopes, then you can add additional calibration points, and you want to choose these alignment stars and calibration stars that are as far apart from each other as possible. Some in the east and some of the western sky, so that you get a base. We call it a triangulation, but we're using more than 3 stars, so not really a triangle, right? But what you're doing is you're creating a map of the night sky, so that once you're done with that calibration, then you can go in and tell it, hey, go point to Orion Nebula, and it'll point right to Orion Nebula and be centered in your eyepiece or very close. So that's the goal of, having a go-to telescope, be able to do all this cool stuff for you all night long, is you could go and do this initial alignment and then go and enjoy a night of observing just by pressing, what object you want to go look at. I want to jump in real quick into the equatorial mount telescopes. So very similar to this. There's one difference though. And remember when I talked about the manual telescopes, that on the alt azimuth telescopes, you get out, you set it, you plop it down in the sky, in the ground, and get it level, and you're pretty much good to go, except for, following whatever instructions it has for zeroing them out, whether that's point to north, have your tube level, to the horizon, or whatever that is. In the case of the German equatorial mounts, you're going to have to point that German equatorial mount to the North Star. And then this becomes very important with the computerized ones, because if you're not close to the North Star, and it doesn't have to be half a degree or anything like that, I've seen it work. The go-tos work just fine. if you're within, say, 5 degrees one way or another, you want to be close. The better, if you could see it just eyesighting it through the tube there, to look at the North Star, and you can see the North Star through that tube, then you're going to be just fine with doing an alignment after that. But there's a few extra steps on this, so let me go through it. First, I should mention on either of the computerized setups, whether it's the alt-azimuth or the equatorial mount telescopes, you really need to practice your setup and do your alignment indoors when it's daylight first. You can do it outside if it's a good day out, but you want to do it in daylight. That's really the key. And practice this, because it's a whole lot harder once it gets dark out. But once you get practiced in setting it up once or twice, and you can see the controls and what's going on, and understand what all you need to do, and just simulate that you're aligning these stars and doing all these steps, then it'll be so much easier when you go out in the nighttime for your very first setup. What a lot of people will do in line with that is they'll go and they'll set up their telescope a half an hour before dark, before the sun actually sets. So you're setting up your telescope and doing all of these things when you can see all the stuff that you need to see. Makes it a little bit easier. Then as it gets dark, now the stars start to come out, and you can do your alignment and start to look. The difficulty with that is you have to orient them out towards the North Star and do that initial alignment. If you can't see the North Star, then you have to wait until you can see the North Star. Well, you can get really close, as I said, to the North Star, and you'll be good to go. Now, one of the things that I do with my telescope setup, and this kind of goes again into the things to bring with you when it out, is you could take a compass, or you could use an application on your iPhone or Android Google phone that's a compass application, to be able to point to north, and then you set your elevation up, down, to what your latitude is, and that's where the North Star is always the same as your latitude, your GPS coordinates. So I think we're at 39 degrees north, I think, here. So you set your latitude to 39 degrees north on your telescope, you're going to be pretty close. And you set north. Now, when you set north, this can be more difficult actually with a handheld compass if you don't know what you're doing. Then if you get I have a free app that I got on my iPhone for the compass. You need to make sure that it's pointed to true north, not magnetic north. And there's a difference depending on where you are on the globe to what that the declination is between true north and magnetic north. It so happens here in the Colorado Springs area that it's about 11 degrees off. But so I can set that on my compass, and so my compass is automatically set that when I point it to north, the little arrow is pointing me to true north because I've offset it by that 11 degrees. On the iPhone and Android phone apps, which are free, you could just push a button on whether you want it to point to magnetic north or true north, and it'll automatically change it for you based on where you are. So that's so much easier to do. But if you use your compass, make sure that you're away from your telescope, not close to any metal, because even with your phone, you'll offset that reading. So step away from your telescope, step back and get that alignment to north, get it aligned to the North Star, and you'll be ready to go to the next step. The other thing that you have to do with these types of telescopes that we didn't have with the alt-azimuth is they have these counterweights down here. And those counterweights counter this big, heavy telescope tube that's up at the top. And you might not need, so many weights. You might need more depending on what telescope you have. But what you want to do before you go put your telescope tube on this mount is you want to put your weights on first, and put them down there so they're going to have the most weight, counter to your tube. Make sure you have more weight than you need to start off with. And then you'll put your telescope on there. That way, if you did the opposite, if you put your tube on there first, it becomes top heavy. And what's going to happen? Your telescope's going to fall over and crash in the ground. You don't want that to happen. So you put your weights on, then you put your tube on, and then you want to balance the mount. And the way that you do that is you turn this axis on its side, horizontal to the ground, so that the tube and the weights are at the same height above the ground. And then you'll release the clutches that are on your telescope. There's some little clutch arms there. And you'll release those while you're holding your telescope. And this is very important that you do that. Once again, you don't want your telescope to be crashing into your tripod legs or anything like that. So once you have that tube and the weights horizontal and you release the clutches, you want to see whether the tube causes the weights to come up or the weights cause the tube to come up. Where are you balanced? And you want to be pretty close to being balanced. You'll hear it referred to as you want to be a little east heavy, that on the eastern side of how you have the telescope set up, you want to be a little heavier than on the western side. However you have that set, and the tube on the one side and the weights on the other. The reason for that is what you're trying to do here is you're trying to not make the telescope do too much work. The gears specifically need to mesh, and if they mesh and they hold on to that meshing between the gear teeth and they stay together all the time, then you'll have accurate tracking. So again, it goes to having good accurate tracking is you want to keep those gear teeth to be meshed together. And the way that you do that is you put a little bit of load on those teeth, but not too much, just, because if you do too much, if the engine works too hard, then it has a tough time and it can't keep up to the stars. So you want it to be balanced with a little bit heavy to the east side, so the motor's constantly working, but barely having to do that work to be able to continue to drive the telescope as it tracks from east to west across the sky. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I explained that well. Pretty much from there on, everything else is the same as what I explained with the all azimuth mounts. You want to enter in the date, the time zone, the time, daylight savings time, and latitude and longitude. And check this and recheck this and make sure that it's the correct information that's in there. And then when daylight savings time changes, you got to make sure to go back in there and change it back. So that's really probably the number one thing that I see mistakes made. That if you're off by an hour, by the way, here's a quiz question for you out there. If you're off on your time zone by an hour, or if you're off in your time by an hour, what's that going to do when it goes to try to do its alignment? The answer is, and I'll jump in because I'm not monitoring chat, and Ron, I don't know if we have any questions out there quite yet, and I'll take them in just a second. The answer is that if you're off by 1 hour, when it goes to point at that first alignment star, it'll be off by 15 degrees because the sky moves 15 degrees per hour east to west. So that's a really good indication that when you start to put in your alignment stars and the telescope points 15 degrees off, you might have a setting wrong, whether that's the time zone or the daylight savings time. Those are the two things that'll catch you and get you messed up. Or you might be on the wrong date. It might be on the wrong year. So just double check that, triple check it, because that's one of the easiest things to see failure when you're trying to get your go-to. Ron, do we have any questions up to date?
Dave, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we have one from Jeff Wood who asks, Can you talk about mounting and aligning a star sense on a Celestron?
I can briefly. I happen to have a Celestron 9¼ inch AVX mount. That's what's shown in the picture here. And I also have a CGM mount. I hook up the StarSense camera up to the onto the I use an SCT. I have a 9¼ inch SCT that I put on these telescopes. Very similar again to what's in this picture here. But I put that StarSense on there in the replace of the finder scope. You don't need a finder if you're using the StarSense. And then what you do with the StarSense is hopefully you're in an open area and you don't have clouds, because what the StarSense camera does, it's an f2 30-degree field of view camera, something like that. What it does is it'll snap a photo of the night sky, and then it uses what's called plate solving software to be able to match the stars that it sees in the camera on the sensor with the star maps that are in its database. And then it'll go and point to the other side of the sky, and it'll do 2 in the east and 2 in the west is what an auto alignment will do. And it'll do that triangulation of where it pointed in the sky to be able to create that map of doing a go-to alignment. So you don't have to do these manual alignments that I just went through here. But when you do the very first time you do this, when you do that initial alignment, that only gets you so close. So then you have to go and after you do that initial alignment, you calibrate the camera, and calibrating the camera then will center it into that cone of alignment that it just created. Then what you have to do is, once you've then calibrated the camera with the alignment you just did, you actually do have to go in and do a second alignment. And that second alignment then will get you into where it's really a great device. Once it's set up, it'll you tell it, go point at the Lagoon Nebula M8, and it'll go and it'll put it in the center of the eyepiece, no problem. And you didn't have to go and, know names of stars or anything like that. You just did it. If auto align doesn't work, or if you have an obstruction on one side, you're out in your backyard and you can't do an alignment because an auto alignment because one side of the house is blocked off, you can do a manual alignment, and you can manually point to different areas of the sky and have it triangulate and be able to get an alignment that way as well. So yeah, they're a little bit on the pricey side. They're the StarSense is an accessory. It's about $320, $330, somewhere in that range right now. But once you have that alignment, my experience has been that I've actually been able to take it off of the tube and put it away. And then the next time that I go set up my telescope in the backyard and I put that all back on again, that it's still good enough to go, that I don't have to go and recalibrate the camera and realign. I can just do that one initial alignment after it gets dark enough. And when I say dark enough, by the way, that f2 camera can see the stars before our eyes can see the stars, so you don't have to wait too late into darkness to get that. But handy little tool. And some telescopes nowadays will come with the StarSense as an option. The Meade telescopes have a similar type of camera system that you could buy that will automatically do those plate solves and point you and do the go-tos. The downside of them, the only downside, as I said, is if you have obstructions or if you have patchy clouds, because when the camera tries to do a plate solve and it can't see the stars because of the clouds, that's stuff that you can overcome when you do it manually, but you can't, the computers aren't smart enough yet to overcome that necessarily. The good thing is the StarSense, if you don't want to do any of that stuff, you can still do your manual point. So hopefully I answered that. And Renee Isherwood, on regards to the manual tabletop Orions, I started to talk about the manual telescopes. They're pretty much plop them down on the ground, and you can just point them to the different places in the sky. So a tabletop, I do want to mention that probably the most important thing for me on a tabletop type of telescope is you want a not one of these plastic tables that you set up for a picnic or whatever, because a little bit of wind and that telescope will slide right off of the table. This is from experience, I'm sorry to say. Even if you have a tablecloth on there or something like that, I just don't like the idea of putting it on the hood of my car or even on that. Actually, I think the better route for a tabletop, I have a little 60 millimeter tabletop telescope that I bring out to outreach when we do in-person outreach. And what I do with that, and what I've discovered best for me, is I went to Staples or Office Max, and I bought some of those what do they call, milk crates. Those square milk crates, I bought 3 of them. Actually had some already in my house, so I just bought what I needed. But I could stack those for the height of the child that's going to be looking through the telescope, and putting the tabletop telescope on top of that. But that's not sturdy enough either, so you got to do one more step, and that is just get 2 bungee cords. And you take the bungee cords and you bungee from one side of the milk crate to the other side of the milk crate on either side of the main body of what's holding the tube there. And you could just slide the milk crates around, and that'll just stay nice and sturdy. And even if the wind comes up, it won't knock it over. Wind goes right through those open areas of the milk crates. And even if the wind is really strong, like it was one day when this happened to me, and it knocks it over, if you have those bungee cords securing that telescope down, it actually won't, the telescope won't hit the ground. The milk crates hit the ground, and maybe a larger telescope it might a little bit. But again, you could secure with sandbags, or there's all sorts of different things you could do to secure it. But yeah, I found the securing using the milk crates idea, and I could change the height that I want the telescope depending on whether it's a larger person like me, an adult, or a small child. I could change that size. So fun stuff. So any other questions, Ron, or I'll move on?
Yeah. Wait, hold on a second here. So actually, yeah, we do have a couple. These were answered on within the chat, but I think there's some good questions that might actually some other people might want to know the answer to, simply because there's a lot of people that are looking at planets right now, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, and so on, with everything that's going on with the conjunction tomorrow and all that. Sanders said, I bought the Celestron travel scope for my daughter, and I'm wondering what lenses I should buy to complement it. I've been reading about the Barlow lens 2 times. Would that be good to see Saturn's rings clearer?
That's a good question, and I did not specifically go into, and I have a whole bunch more slides to get to with accessories and things to buy for telescopes as recommendations, but I don't go into the eyepieces quite yet, because typically the telescopes that we get brand new come with 1, maybe 2 telescopes. I find that 90% or 95% of the time, with all the different accessories that I have, eyepieces, I probably have a dozen eyepieces in an eyepiece kit. Out of all of that, I use 2 eyepieces. One is a 25 millimeter to 30 millimeter eyepiece, and that's a pretty wide field view in any telescope that I use. And then the other eyepiece that I have is an 11 millimeter eyepiece. And whether it's 12 millimeter, 10 millimeter, 9 millimeter, doesn't really matter. In that medium power range is where I spend 90 to 95% of my time is with those 2 eyepieces. You can get a Barlow. I have some problems with some manufacturers' Barlows that they don't make really good quality ones, but look for something in the mid-price range of Barlows that you see for sale. the cheaper that you buy, the less that they do in quality control to make those optics work good for you. So if you buy the cheapest that there is on the market, you're probably going to get something that's not high quality, and you're going to get frustrated with. That might not be the case. I've seen people buy off of Wish and other places, eBay or something, that you buy used, and you could get some pretty quality stuff. But yeah, you could get a Barlow, and that'll double the magnification of the eyepiece that you have, in an inexpensive way to double each of your magnifications of any eyepiece you have.
Awesome. And then there was a follow-up question to that. Is what about a moon filter? Are those worth the money?
Yes, and I'm going to get to that. Let's jump into those next. Hold on to that thought, because the answer is yes. Sure. But I have a specific filter that I'm going to recommend. But any moon filter will do you well. So let's jump into that. Any more questions before I move forward?
There was one other one that they said, I'm not familiar with StarSense. Did this replace Skyline? What are the differences? I don't know if that would be something you were going to talk about already, but yeah, that was the last one.
Yeah, no, I think the Skyline came first and then StarSense, and I think that they might use those terms somewhat interchangeably in Celestron. I actually was a beta tester way back when. Well, let me explain one thing with Celestron as an anecdote, and that is that when the Celestron StarSense came out, it wasn't ready for prime time. It only worked in the Northern Hemisphere, didn't work. They released it globally, but it didn't work in the Southern Hemisphere at all, not at all. And it only worked in the Northern Hemisphere, and it had lots and lots and lots of bugs. So they stood up a beta test team, of which I became a part of, because I bought it right when it first came out. As soon as it was available, I got it. And it had all these bugs and problems with it. And I became a part of the beta test team to test software to fix all these problems. And so that's where my knowledge and experience with StarSense comes from, is I was playing around and giving him suggestions on what to fix. And unfortunately, they didn't fix everything I wanted them to fix, to be honest with you. But it doesn't have a sky tour like the Nexstar Celestron hand controllers have. You can't go and observe just in an area of a constellation. There are some features that were on the hand controller that I really liked as a beginner that were not on the SkySense. Which you would think that the SkySense, if anything, is or the StarSense, if anything, is for a beginner. But they didn't even include those beginner features that were in the previous hand controller. So you can use either hand controller on these different mounts that Celestron makes. Again, refer to your manufacturer on what you can use. But I can switch back and forth. One day I can go out and do StarSense, or I could put on the Nexstar Plus controller and do automatic manual alignment and go that route. So I could go either way with that's the nice thing about these computerized telescopes, is they have some interchangeable equipment. So let's talk real quick. In the next 40 minutes or so, I think, and it might be, we'll see how it goes with all the different stuff. And I want to catch everything. And if we have astronomers that are out there that I missed something, then let me know. But there's a couple of things that we have to do. That I told you about setting up your telescope, and I had jumped in on the different types of telescopes because of the complexity of all azimuth mounts versus the German Equatorial mounts, and doing the go-to alignments, that I skipped over two important things that you might want to consider. Especially, I do this more on my manual Newtonian telescope than I do on my SCT that might not necessarily require it. So let's talk about it. One of those is to do a collimation of your telescope. And a collimation of your telescope is where you're aligning the primary mirror And the secondary mirror, I'm talking about a Newtonian type telescope primarily here in this portion. If you have one of those manual Dobsonian telescopes or any telescope that's using a mirror, it's going to have a mirror at the bottom of the tube and a mirror at the top of the tube that points that light into the focuser tube. And that focuser tube then is where the eyepiece goes that gives you the final focus that you looks in and you see with your eye. So what you want to make sure is done with that type of telescope that has those mirrors is those mirrors need to be precisely aligned with each other. If you go out and point your telescope and you try to focus at the moon and you don't get a clear view of the moon, that's one of the things that might be the problem, is that it might not be collimated with each other. Now, again, collimation will be in your manual of your telescope, hopefully, but in most vendors will have it in their manual. But they'll usually provide you, if anything, they'll provide you a little cap that'll have a little hole in the middle of it. And in place of the eyepiece, you put the cap in the focuser tube, and you'll look through that little pinpoint of the hole, and you follow the instructions for aligning the bottom mirror with the top mirror and looking at how it appears in that view. And this is a whole hour-long discussion, really, to go in and talk about how do you properly collimate your telescope. But I do a really simple thing, and that is I have a Hotech 1 1/4 inch laser collimation tool. It costs about $130 or so, somewhere in that range. But it saves me a lot of pain and hassle because it has a little laser light that shines down. And that laser light shines through the focusing tube, and it hits the secondary mirror and bounces to the primary mirror. And then if it's properly collimated, that light shines back up to the secondary mirror and back into the focuser tube exactly in the same place that it left. So if it goes in and it comes out and it's exactly in the same place, and you can't see it, I'm going to use my drawing tools again here. If I go and I guess I'll use this arrow. It's a little tiny arrow. But if you look right here, there's a little targeting thing. So the laser light goes in, points down, and it hits that primary mirror. On most of the better telescopes that have the mirror at the bottom of the tube, it'll have a little circle in the center of that mirror. But it might be a triangle in some cases, but mostly it's usually like a circle, like a back in the old days, a 3-hole paper reinforcements on your ruled paper back in school. Just a little circle with a hole in a donut shape. And you want that laser light to go into that hole. And the way that you adjust that is you use you turn the screws. There's 3 screws at the top of the telescope that you would turn to get that laser into the center of that circle. And then you look on the collimation tool on this target here, and you want the laser light to be at the center of that target. And the way you get that is you go down, and there's 3 knobs at the base of your telescope. Again, if you have a telescope that has the mirror able to be moved, and you move the bottom mirror so that the red light shines right in the middle. And you do that alignment, then you'll have pinpoint stars. If everything else is good, your optics are good on your telescope and that sort of thing. But you have pinpoint stars, and you'll have better views of the planets, things like cloud features and the moons. They won't look like little commas and things like that. So that's something to consider, especially if you're serious about getting into astronomy and you want to have good, clear views. You want to have good collimation, and one way to do that with the Newtonian telescope, the ones with the mirrors, is to have a laser collimation tool. With the SCT type telescopes, the Smith's Cassegrain tubes are typically you don't need to do too much in the way of collimation. Usually the only collimation you do is on the secondary mirror. And even that, once you set it, it doesn't usually change all that much. And you can go quite a long time between setting it. And the way that you do that is you point it up to a semi-bright star, not the brightest star in the sky, but a semi-bright star, and you move that star off focus a little bit, and you'll see these concentric rings. If they're not perfectly circular around a black donut, then you're out of collimation. You can make those adjustments. But you have to have good atmospheric conditions in the sky, and it can be complicated. But SCTs and the glass telescopes, the refractor telescopes, those don't require the collimation that the Newtonian type of telescopes do. So you pay a price for getting a lot cheaper telescope when you get to mirrored ones, but you do have to do a little bit of extra work, and one is this collimation piece. But not hard to do at all if you get a laser collimation tool. I find them really nice. You do want to make sure that your laser is one of the better ones, like the Hotech model. If you get a cheaply made one, if you roll this on a flat surface, you might see that red spinning in a circle, and that is an indication that your laser isn't collimated. So it doesn't do you any good if the laser is not pointing straight to do collimation of your telescope with that. So just be aware of, again, that you get what you pay for is what it comes down to. The other thing that we got to talk about is finder scopes. And there's different finder scopes out there. Some people, there isn't any right or wrong answer. Astronomy is a very personal type of hobby. Some people like an easy finder that's up in the top left here. This easy finder type of thing is a red dot. It points a red dot onto a piece of glass that's pointed towards the sky. And you could use a red dot finder. It has zero magnification, and they work perfectly well. And some of the new telescopes, that's what they'll come with, is a type of red dot finder like this. They're pretty inexpensive, about $30 or so, maybe even less. Then you have the finder scope type of telescope, types of finders, and different people, again, like different ones. Some people like a right angle finder scope for convenience, that they could just lean over and look and see the view, like a little mini telescope. It usually is. This one is a 9 times magnification. They range, as I mentioned before, between 6 times and 10 times magnification. But you can buy all sorts of different finder scopes for what your needs. But some people like this right angle finder scope, and some like the straight through version. I personally use the straight through version because it's in line parallel with my telescope tube. So it makes it a little easier for me personally to go and do those initial finding the stars that I want to look for in my finder scope. But as I said, some people like the right angle versus the straight through. It's a personal decision. Then there's this other device over here, and there's other versions of this. This is, again, a zero magnification type of finder. It's called a Telrad. And the Telrads are about $45, $50 right now. Again, prices all changing because of supply and demand and all sorts of things like that. But what it does is it has a laser in here that projects 3 red circles up into the sky. I actually have a slide for that, because I really like them. This outer circle right here is 4 degrees field of view. The middle circle is a 2 degrees field of view, and the inner circle is a 0.5 degree field of view. So to give you some perspective on that, a 0.5 degree field of view is the size of the moon. The moon is a 0.5 degree. So that's the size of that circle. The outer one is 4 degrees field of view. That's a typical field of view of a finder scope. So it can come in really handy when you use the Telrad in addition to using a finder scope, which is what I do on my telescope. And Jupiter Joe added here, if you're using a screwdriver, always put the telescope horizontal to prevent dropping anything into your primary. Yeah, that's definitely a good advice that when we're going back to the collimation topic, there's 3 screws on the top of the secondary that when you go and you're turning those screws, you want to make sure that you don't drop anything onto that mirror, because the mirror at the base of that tube is going to be very delicate. The coating of aluminum on those mirrors is only like a micron or 2. Very, very delicate. You don't want to just go in there and do a power sprayer to get the dirt out or anything like that, because you'll ruin those surfaces of those mirrors. So you want to have it. I have mine at an angle, actually, Joe, is what I do. Is mine is at about the angle 45 degrees. So if I were to drop, mine uses a Allen wrench. If my Allen wrench drops into my tube, it drop into the side of the tube versus onto the mirror itself. But that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So what do you do with the finder scope? Well, you need to put the finder scope after you get your telescope initially set up, but probably before you do that first alignment, because this will change your balance on your telescope. For the gem ones, when we talked about balancing the tube with the weights and things like that, you want to do your collimation first, and then once you have collimation done, if you have to, maybe you don't need to do collimation. I always check collimation, by the way, before any observing session I do with my mirrored telescopes. But I don't necessarily have to change my collimation. I just check it to make sure it's good, because I don't want to have a bad night. It's not a good night if I'm seeing blurry stuff or stuff that's not pinpoint stars when they should be, because I didn't do a 3-minute collimation activity with my collimator. So do collimation first. That way you've got everything working on the telescope piece. Then you do your alignment of your finder scope. So put your finder scope on your telescope, and then to do your alignment of your finder scope is the opposite that you're going to do after you get it set up. And that is point to an object with your telescope, preferably a fixed object on the ground if you can, because the sky is moving, or we're moving, creating the sky to appear to move 15 degrees per hour, right? So you point to the moon, or you point to Saturn or Jupiter or something like that. They're going to move across the sky, and you're not going to get a very precise alignment of your finder scope. That's fine. You could do that if that's all you have. But we have this great fortune here in Colorado Springs that once the visitor center on top of Pikes Peak opens back up, we'll have the light back on up there, I'm sure. We have Cheyenne Mountain, and we have lots of different features that are along the range, the Rampart Range and down the line that we could point to with our telescope. So find one of those features. Find something that you'll be able to see both in your telescope and in your finder scope. And I also, again, just like I did when I explained about alignment, I'll actually use my lowest magnification or my widest field view to find what I'm going to be looking for in my telescope. And then I go to the higher magnification eyepiece, the one with the smaller number, to get it centered as best as possible. The highest magnification eyepiece that you're going to use that night is what I use to do a finder scope alignment. Because if I can find it in that magnification eyepiece, I certainly will find it in those lower magnification eyepieces that have a much larger field of view, right? So what you do is you first set up your telescope to point at that thing that you're pointing at. You want it to be at least let's say half a mile to a mile away. The further the better, because if you're too close, then you could have some other issues that come up with getting it aligned just right. So as far away as you could get, a light post like this, electrical power line, things. I use the top of, I find, the biggest antenna that's on the top of Pike on Cheyenne Mountain. And I point to that, and I get it in the middle of my telescope. And then I go over to my finder scope, and I use the alignment screws on my finder scope to be able to move that finder left and right, up and down to where it's centered, just like it is in my eyepiece, but in my finder scope. Now you have your telescope and your finder scope aligned with each other, so that from now on, when you go to point something with your finder scope, then it's going to be in the eyepiece in your telescope. So by doing the reverse, point with the telescope first, align with the finder scope with the telescope, then you'll be able to use your finder scope from then on. And I've seen posts by people that for whatever reason, they didn't receive a finder scope with their telescope when they bought it, or they didn't know that it needed to go on their telescope. People would go out and they'd set their telescopes up for the first time, and they'd just be trying to point with a eyepiece that's giving them 100 times magnification or 200 times magnification, where that's a much narrower field of view. It's like a grain of sand at arm's length, versus looking through a finder scope, which is going to be a 4 or 5 degree field of view, like looking through a pair of binoculars. So big difference there on how much enjoyment and satisfaction you're going to have if you don't have your finder scope properly aligned and be able to use that. Now, again, if you're using the Star Sense, going back to that, you don't have a finder scope, you don't need to do that. You just put in the go-to, you say go to this and go point. But there's something, and maybe even with the go-to alignments, you don't need too much of a use of a finder scope. But what happens when the power goes out? And what happens if you came out to do an observing and you forgot your cables? To power up one of your motors or something like that. You could still, if you have the finder scope on there, you could still go and point to these different objects in the sky, and to do the initial alignments and things. It's always helpful for that. Already talked about the Telerad. Now, one of the things that I really like about the Telerad, that I bought it, and when I bought mine initially, I didn't know how to use it, and it sat on my telescope for about a year, and didn't really get much of any use at all because I didn't know how to use it. I thought it was just like a red dot finder, point at a star and it'll be in my eyepiece. Same difference with this, but it has these circles. And if you get some of the different atlases, one that I recommend is the Sky and Telescopes Pocket Sky Atlas, or the Jumbo Pocket Sky Atlas. And we're going to get to those here in just a second and talk those books. They have these Telerad circles are listed in the legend in the books. The small version of the atlas, it's the size of a dime. And in the large version of the atlas, it's the size of a quarter. So you could use a dime and a quarter and this, legend here to be able to go and figure out how to go from different stars to go find these things. What also is available, and they're in a lot of the different sky atlases will have different these Telerad finders, and they have that also in the electronic ones. Sky Safari on Apple and Android as a star atlas that you could get for your phones or iPads or Android tablets, that they'll have the Telerad circles as well to help you with alignment. Now, you can also go to a website, and I could provide this to folks if they need to find it, but you just do a Google search for Telerad charts of the Messier objects, I think, something like that. I did a Google search, and I came up with something like a 19-page or 18-page set of sky charts that not quite as good as the Sky Atlas, by the way. We'll talk about that. But what it does is it superimposes those Telerad circles into different parts of the sky. So what you do with that Telerad is you go and you turn it on so those little circles are illuminated. It's like a heads-up display of these circles on the sky. And you go and you point it at the object in the sky to where those circles are exactly like they are in this description here. So for like Orion Nebula, you have this area, you point those circles over that area, and you'll have Orion Nebula in your eyepiece. You go over into this area of Canis Major, and there's an open cluster there that you'll be able to look at in your eyepiece. So it gives you some really easy, if you could see the stars which is the big key. There is Beehive cluster over there. You have Pleiades over off of the view here, I think. But if you use that Telrad, it'll point you to all of those with the maps. It'll tell you where to go and to look and find these objects in the sky. So I find that really useful. I really like this. I actually printed these free charts, and I have a little laminator, and I laminated them so they'll go with me when I go out with my telescope to go look at these different objects. And the different objects we can see after dark in those first couple of hours before it's my bedtime. We use those star charts to be able to they change through the year. But they're all there, and they're a good start for looking at objects in the night sky once we get past the moon and the planets and things like that. So let's go. And then, so I talked already a little bit about what you want to bring along with you is electronic or a paper star atlas. As I said, it's kind of like a Rand McNally roadmap, a paper roadmap. Some people are just fine with GPS, but what if your GPS goes down? It's kind of nice to have that paper map along with you. We're going to talk a little bit more about other books and maps and web printouts. I just talked about for that one, and so I'll get into that in a minute. You want to bring a red light flashlight out with you because you'll lose your night vision. I'll talk more. We'll talk telescope filters, observing chair and table potentially. I recommend a logbook in pencil. Or pen is fine as well. Pencils are helpful for a couple of different things we'll talk about. Wearing laser clothing to stay warm and other tools, batteries, and even a 3mm lawn and leaf garden garbage bag is good in case you're out and observing and all of a sudden storm comes up and you need to cover up your gear. I've used 3mm black plastic bags for times that I've been out to camping areas where I've stayed out overnight. So good to have. So let's talk quickly about star maps and books to find targets. Already talked pretty much all I need to about the different star atlases and why you need one. I recommend the Sky and Telescopes Pocket Sky Atlas or the Jumbo Pocket Sky Atlas. They have a ton of different, they have the sky broken down. I think they're easy to read. They're easy to transport around, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of other ones that are out there. I've tried them all. These are the ones that I personally like. But again, astronomy is a very personal thing. There will be other astronomers that'll say, oh, I like Star Atlas 2000, or I like, one of a number. There's a bunch of other books. So I like these. I use these. I've had multiple copies of these, one that stays at home and one that goes with me every time I go out. I find them very useful to look at. So consider a Pocket Sky Atlas. Now, some people like electronic and don't like paper at all. Sky Safari Pro and Star Walk 2 are the two that I use for electronic purposes. I don't like to use my electronics when I'm out observing personally for the most part. So I stick with paper. But when I am using electronic, it's Sky Safari and Star Walk 2. And Star Walk 2 is like $4.99, I think it was, and real simple little app. And there's other ones that are out there that people like to use as well. So you have an atlas. Well, let's go back to my analogy at the very beginning that you're going on a trip to Yellowstone. So you want to have a map to how do you get there and what towns are you going to go through along the way as you get there. That's very similar to what a star atlas does for you. Doesn't really tell you about all the cool stuff there is to see once you get there. So what I like about books like Turn Left at Orion and Deep Sky Wonders is by Sue French. who's a columnist in, or is now retired, but was a columnist in Sky and Telescope magazine for one of their monthly columns that they had. But these two books, what they do is they break down the night sky into months or times of year. And so it's now January. I can refer to my Deep Sky Wonders book and look at January, and it'll tell me what's up in the night sky in January for me to look at. It said, hey, you might want to look at this globular cluster. It's over here. Here's a finder chart and how to get there. Same thing with Turn Left at Orion. It does that as well, just in a little bit different way. Turn Left at Orion also has a Days of the Moon section in there. So if you're starting in a good place for any beginner astronomer to start is looking at the moon and enjoying all the features there are to see on the moon. And Turn Left at Orion at the beginning, in the opening, has several pages of, on day 1, after new moon, this is what you can look at. At day 2, after new moon, this is what you can look at, all the way through from full moon all the way back to being new moon again. So you can go through and look and use that as a resource. That's in Turn Left at Orion, but not in Deep Sky Wonders. But both of them are great books to have. Very useful, and they're more like the Frodo, what do they call that? The Frodo's book of, when you go on a trip to, say, Yellowstone, you just don't go, hopefully, to have a great experience, you just don't go cold into Yellowstone and tell the park ranger, hey, I'm here, what do I see? But there's a lot of people anyway, I'll say it this way, because I want to be nice, and that I bought a book. Okay, that's me. Not everybody's like that. But if you buy the book, it'll tell you, here's what to see in this section of the park, and here's what to see in this section of the park, and you want to walk through here, and this is, a little more detail about what you're looking at. That's the same as what these books do, is you can look in your star atlas and find M1, but what's M1? Do you know? Did you know that it's a supernova remnant from, a exploding star from, I think it was 1610, I think is when that exploded. So pretty recent, maybe 1410. But in any case, that's not worthwhile. But it goes into more detail about how do you find it from the other stars that they're in the sky. Again, you don't have to worry about it. If you got go-to and that's all you're going to do is go-to ever, that's fine. But we encourage the looking at the sky, intrinsically from using the stars as a roadmap to find other dimmer things that you would not otherwise be able to see. And there might be things that you could see and look at that may not be in those go-to catalogs, or if you just have the catalog and that's in the electronic hand controller of your telescope, it doesn't tell you anything about that object, or very little if it tells you anything at all. And it'll just say M1, M2, M8, M57. It won't tell you what it is that you're looking at necessarily. So these are good supplemental books to give you context of what it is that you're looking at, what there is when you're looking at a particular area of sky, what is there to see in that part of the sky, instead of just, haphazardly going out and looking. And that's one of the big things, and I think I get to it in a later slide, but I'll say it here. It's really important in my mind in enjoying the hobby of astronomy is have a plan of what you want to look at in the sky. And have a plan that's of what's visible in the sky. We'll have people come to our outreach and want to look at Jupiter, for example, and Jupiter's, set by the time that they come out and observe, and then that's not any fun because they were all excited to come to outreach and see Jupiter, and Jupiter was not visible for us to see, in that particular night. So we set a plan for what it is that we're going to observe in any evening that we go out, whether I'm doing that as an outreach event or I'm going out on my own to just enjoy, looking through my telescope personally, is I have an idea of, I'm going to look up at all the different objects that I can see in Cassiopeia tonight. Or I'm going to look over I want to look in the section of Taurus and Orion and Gemini in that section of the sky tonight. That's a good winter thing to do. So, so having a plan that you can go and look at a particular area of the sky or particular objects you want to look at. You want to look at different globular clusters, and that'll give you more enjoyment overall when you have, these resources available to you. So that's why we recommend them. Don't need to have both Turn Left at Orion or Deep Sky Wonders. If you were to get one to start off with, I think Deep Sky Wonders, personally, it's like $30 right now. It's really a big book. It's actually bigger than what I actually bring out to my telescope. There is a Sue French book called Celestial Sampler that came out before Deep Sky Wonders. It's a much smaller paperback version, but it's no longer in print and worth a lot of money. So I still bring it out to my telescope, but it's basically the same book as the Deep Sky Wonders and really worthwhile. The Turn Left at Orion book is a little more complicated and detailed. Let me move on so I don't run out of time. The other book that's kind of a balance of both of those sets is Star Atlas and information about what you're looking at is the Night Watch by Terence Dickinson. It's a pretty good a book. I have no problems recommending it as a good starter atlas and book. If there's one book to buy that you want to buy an atlas and something that describes a little bit about what you're looking at, this would be the book to do. And then let's talk red flashlights. So I want to do a sound check. Ron, can you still hear me okay? Okay. Hold on just a second, if you will. And I have Will Keebaugh said to Turn Left at Orion is a good atlas for beginners. Totally agree. It's not like, it has some complications. There's a lot of people that don't recommend it for beginners. I'm kind of in that category, I guess, just because of the detail. But it sure has a lot of cool stuff to say, hey, go look at, beyond the tail of the dog in the Canis Major, and there's a couple of colorful stars we call the Winter Alberio. Go look at that. Or there's a really cool cluster in that same area. It gives lots of really awesome stuff to look at. I need to switch over to my headset real quick, so just give me a quick second and I'll be back. Hopefully I can make this work. That should, okay. I had just, my wireless was going out on me, so I've been using it all afternoon for other meetings. Okay, so I do want to do a sound check. Ron Sparkman, you can hear me okay? I'm not hearing sound on my speakers if you're responding to me, Ron.
You're just fine.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you. What was that about flat? Okay.
No,
I'm
saying that you were on the air.
Okay. All right. All right. I'm gonna press forward. I'm gonna go a little bit faster through the last little bit here. This is mainly about what accessories. Hey, what do you need to have a good night? Again, these are all personal decisions. These are things these are my ideas, and I want the other astronomers that are online, I appreciate y'all being on here. Thank you. That if you have other ideas, if there's anything that I'm saying that you don't agree with, that's fine. Come on and come off of mute and bring your ideas forward. So talking on the red flashlights. The reason you want red flashlights, if you don't know, if you're new to this, that if you use the white flashlights, they'll harm your night vision. That'll take up to 20-30 minutes for you to get that adjustment of your eyes receptors to be able to see as much in the night sky. So you want to protect that vision, and the way that we do that is with red flashlights. And you can buy red flashlights, which I have shown here on the screen. You could get some of the reflector repair tape from the auto parts store and put it over a flashlight. You could take red picnic table plastic that's like a bucket on the different party stores or Target or King Super's Superstore or whatever, and you put that over the eyepiece. That works okay. Red electrical tape works okay. They all work differently to some degree. You know, some are better than others, but and there's a Rubylith film that you could buy that you cover up over your flashlights. You could cover up over monitor screens and things like that as well if you're using a computer or a phone. But a lot of people just resort to buying from the store, you know, different types of flashlights. And you have the ones that are handheld, and you could turn a lot of these, like this one from Celestron. They're about, I think, about $15 maybe for this one. Use a 9-volt battery, I think, on that, which I didn't like too well. But it has a little dimmer control. So you turn down the brightness of that light to just what you need to be able to see your charts and things. If your red light is too bright, your red light is actually going to do the same that the white light does in terms of harming your night vision. So just consider that if your red light is too bright, it's not gonna help. So I actually bought a headlamp from Orion, because Orion telescopes, they make telescopes, all right? And they came out with a headlamp, because I like the headlamp that where my head looks down at the star atlas, it goes down onto the book and I can see it. That's great. I like that. And Orion came out with a flashlight. It was a red light flashlight. It's like, great. Orion, one of these telescope manufacturers, is selling a headlamp that I can buy that's from them. Well, when I bought it, long story short, I bought it. I turned it on, you know, put in batteries, turned it on, and it was a bright red flashlight. Way too bright for what we need in astronomy. So I did a lot of research. I bought a lot of different stuff. Unfortunately, I do that way too often. But I found I forget what the name of this headlamp is, but it's like a Polar Tech quad red LED. It has a red LED filter. You can't see it there in that picture, just barely. There's a little knob there. You slide that up and it puts a red filter over the red flashlight. So what that does for you is that every time you push the button on the flashlight and the light comes on, it's a red light, as long as that filter is up over those lights. And it just doesn't fall down by accident. It clicks into place and stays there. So it's really great. And you can control like 3 different power controls. You can adjust how bright that light is to a really to that dimness that you want it to be. So a lot of these other flashlights that have the Energizer used to sell them in like Lowe's or Home Depot for $14, and you could get the red lamp as well as the white. But a lot of those would have a cycle through that you start off with the white light and cycle through to get to the red light. Well, that doesn't do us any good. If I turn on the white light, I just lost all my night vision. So you have to put your hand over the flashlight until you get to red, then you can remove it. And so you don't lose. You don't want to have that white light coming on. You get a bunch of astronomers yelling at you if you're at a star party. So I found on Amazon this flashlight, and I bought like 3 or 4 of them. So when one goes bad, I still have one. But they have, as I said, they have this little filter that goes over it, and they're really nice to have. I also have one of these, that I could have next to my Atlas, and where sometimes the light just doesn't come down from my forehead down onto the page just right. Or when I'm taking a log or doing a sketch, sometimes these other types of lights are better. So, but bring out red lights. The point is red lights, no white lights.
David,
yeah, go ahead.
Like to toss out one other version. I have it's sold by Celestial Teapot Designs, and it's your basic 9 LED red flashlight, but it only puts out, it's only red LEDs. Having had the experience of accidentally finding the white light, I picked up one of these when I bought something else from Celestial Teapot Designs, and it's like a $10 flashlight. It's a single handheld, but plenty of light, and it's all metal and quite durable. So that's one I will toss out as an alternative that I've had good luck with.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's a lot of different, people get creative. I mean, you can even take a red balloon and put it over a flashlight. It's just simple, inexpensive things to do versus buying and stuff. But yeah, I've looked at ideas of how I could eliminate like a clipboard. So the clipboard's eliminated when I'm doing logging of the different observations or doing a sketch, to have an even light. Because this is the other thing is when you're using a flashlight, you won't notice it when you first get into this hobby, but after a while and it gets dark out and you're looking at paper on a page, especially if you're doing sketching and that sort of thing, is that you want the light to be evenly illuminated over what you're trying to look at. If you have a bright spot, a specular, and then it gets dim, or anything like that, where it's not an even color, an even illumination across what you're looking at, then it can really get hard to find these different objects on the star atlas, or to do your sketches if that's what you're doing and getting into that level of astronomy. So something to consider is something that'll give you even illumination, and that's great. And Celestial Teapot, do a Google search for them. I don't know if you can see that, my view of me in the screen, but Celestial Teapot makes this glow in the dark tape that I put it on my step stools and on my tripod legs and use it quite a bit. And that's from Celestial Teapot Design. So it's a lot better than like the glow in the dark duct tape that you could buy at Walmart. That works too, but this stays. You light this up with the flashlight and it'll stay lit all night long. It's pretty awesome stuff. So with the red lights and I mentioned that just because you mentioned the Celestial Teapot, because that's what that comes from, and that'll come up later as well. So thank you for that, David. Also, we have somebody asked a little bit ago about the moon filters, and there's basically 3 different types of moon filters that I know of. There's 4 really, but 3 main types of moon filters that you can buy. You can buy one that says 25% moon filter, one that says 13% moon filter, and one that says variable polarizing moon filter. Now, what is the difference between the 3? Number one, the 13% and the 25% are going to be relatively cheaper than the polarizing one. Nature of the beast, does something different. It costs more to do a variable like a zoom lens versus a one that does a one-time use type of thing. So a 13% moon filter is going to block out 87% of the moon's light. Only 13% transmissivity rate, transmission. 13% of the light of the moon is going to come through. So that's a really good filter to use. when the moon is 3/4 full to full moon, I would say. Then you have 25% transmission rate. So 25% of the light is going to get through. It's blocking off 75% of the light. That filter is what I recommend people use from half moon to 3/4 moon. You could use it to full moon, but by that time, if you're letting in 75% of the light, all that extra light versus the 13%, might be a little too bright for your eyes. Again, it's personal. Some people want to have a dim view of the moon when they're looking at it and observing it for long periods of time through their telescope, especially with the bigger telescopes that people have. But some people will prefer a little brighter view. So it depends on, do you use a 13% or do you get a 25%? Well, there's a solution to that, and that's the variable polarizing filter. And the two types of variable polarizing filter is there's one that's only one piece of glass, and you rotate the eyepiece in the finder, in the focuser tube, to get it to change the angle of light to how much light it lets in. Those are going to be cheaper than the second option, which is the best option of the two, which is the two-piece variable polarizing filter. It uses two pieces of glass that are screwed on together, and then they have the one rotates against the other to adjust to how dark you want your view to be. And you can adjust that from being super dark to fully wide open. And so you don't have to buy a 13% and a 25%, or not have anything at all. You have this the variable polarizing filter allows you to adjust to what your personal comfort level needs to be. It has the other effect that, and Dave Nasser on the chat that just talked showed me, and I didn't know this, was that the variable polarizing filter can also help when you're taking a look at the moon during the daytime. It helps kind of block out some of that extraneous blue light, scattering of light with the sun's rays, and give you better views of the moon during daytime, is if you use this variable polarizing filter. So I sold. So I have these in my kit for whenever I'm looking at the moon. I like to use the variable polarizing filter. It's a good thing. You're going to want to have a table. We just talked about books, and you have a red flashlight, and you might be doing observing logs and things like that. So it's good to have a little table. I happen to get a tailgate table for $15 that I found at Walmart way back when. I've been trying to find them again so I could buy another one, but the closest thing that they have is a little the marketplace tables that they sell that are about $30 in price. Little small, they're pretty small tables, but they work. They're sturdy. They do the job. And if you don't want to, and they fit right, down on the back of in the car or whatever, and fold up nice. Not the big full size 6-foot type of tables. I get one of the smaller type tables, but what's going to hold my books and my eyepieces and all of the other things like that. You could also, another option that people look at is getting a type of table that campers use, which roll up into a much more smaller, compact form. And those work okay too. The only problem with those that you can run into is the slats can have holes in between them to where things can fall through in those slats, and they're not quite as sturdy as another type of table. But you can even use the back of your car. Some people will open up a hatchback of a SUV and turn the lights off, of course, there. But then use the back of their vehicle as their table for observing, for holding their stuff. You might want to consider an adjustable chair, depending on the type of telescope you have and how long you're going to be observing one object to another. You might consider getting a chair that you could adjust for sitting comfortably at your telescope and doing this view. this particular type of chair that they sell for astronomy run about $150, maybe a little less, depending. But they're pretty nice because they just slide up and down and can be used for a comfortable evening of observing. But if you're cheap like me, another way that you could do it is you could just get a step stool and you could sit on the step stool. And that usually works too, for most of the things that I'm looking at anyway when I'm sitting down. So I use the step stool as well for young children because sometimes my eyepieces on my Dobsonian telescope and sometimes with the SCT, if I'm using that telescope, sometimes those things are too high and the children will need to step up to get up to the telescope. And if you have a circumstance like that, you want to look at a light step stool. I bought the lightweight aluminum Costco step stools. Are super lightweight, not just at Costco. I think you can get them at Walmart as well, maybe some other places, but they're not made of steel. They're made of aluminum, so they're really super lightweight for easy transporting around. They're a whole lot better for this purpose anyway, for carting around than the heavier steel stuff. But then what I do, and going back to that Celestial Seasonings glow in the dark tape, not Celestial Teapot, sorry, Celestial Seasonings is a good tea. But you put the glow tape up on where the kids are going to put their hands and where they're going to put their feet, and that works really well. So the kids know where to hold on to. And I like step stools personally that have those handholds because you don't want your kids grabbing at the eyepiece and or pulling at the telescope and pulling it out of alignment. And you have to go redo that alignment we talked about. So a step stool with the ability for them to hold on to something while they look through the eyepiece with their eye is a great thing. So just something to consider there. All right. So then you want to stay warm for the night. It's no fun to go out and go observing and it was 80 degrees in the daytime and you get out and Colorado should anyway, that if it gets dark out, it's going to get cold out. And especially it does in the mountains. We go up the Mueller State Park in the visitor center area. That's a pretty good place to do observing up there if you can go up there sometime. But I'll tell you, even in the summertime, as soon as that sun goes down, that temperature drops down. And even in the summertime at those elevations, you might need a hat, you might need gloves, and you might need things to keep you warm. So just a few of those I'll go through. Some people, I don't personally use one myself, but some people get the heated vests so they can stay warm that way. I like the gloves that cover, that are both mittens and gloves. So, and they'll cover up my fingers so they'll stay warm but I can pull back the mittens to use my fingers if I need them. And I got some good pairs in the hunting section, clothing at Sportsman's Warehouse here in town, is where I found the gloves that I currently use. So you find those that are going to keep your hands nice and warm. Some of them you could put in heat warmers and things like that or they have ones like the jacket that you could plug in and power with the battery for powered heat and do that. Any of those things or whatever works for you. I like the types of hats that go over my ears and protect my ears from the cold, because that's the first thing that gets cold on my head is my ears. And I happen to have a hat that has the flaps to go over the ears, but you might consider also the ear muffs that cover up your ears and protect them. And then don't forget about your shoes and maybe wool socks. If you wear, like I do, tennis shoes most of the time, those tennis shoes are like open air almost, with their mesh on top, for good breathing. But that makes your toes really super cold when it starts getting cold at night. So buying a decent pair of snow shoes, snow boots to be able to wear that also protect you from any snow that might be on the ground where you're setting up your telescope and all that. I also lay down, I didn't put this on here, I just thought of this. I also lay down, if there's snow on the ground, I'll lay down a plastic tarp that is where I place my telescope, because my base of my Dobsonian telescope is made out of particle board. And particle board and snow and water do not mix very well. So I'll lay down a pad. Different people have used like an RV mat, anything that's large enough for you to put your telescope on that you're going to be walking on. That'll protect your telescope, but it'll also keep your snow off of your feet. And weatherproof boots will help as well. What I wear when it's nice and cold outside, only in the wintertime, not in the summertime, I don't need it, is I bought, again, from Sportsman's Warehouse or Dick's Sporting Goods, one of those sporting goods stores. I bought a pair of hunter's overalls, and those keep me warm down to below 0 degrees. I've been up to Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument doing outreach when it was 16 degrees or colder up there, and my telescope equipment would freeze before I was cold. So that's just something to consider. Is those work pretty well. I did try like a ice fishing outfit that I had because I was an ice fisherman. And the ice fishing outfit works too, but it's a lot more big and bulky and costs a lot more than just buying a $100 pair of overalls that the hunters use. So that'll keep you, from your head down to your toes, that'll keep you nice and warm. And when you're warm and cozy, you can, along with maybe a cup of hot chocolate, tea, or coffee, you can go and have a full night of enjoyment on looking at the stars. Along to go with that is hand and feet warmers might be worthwhile. I don't personally use the feet warmers myself. Some people do and like them. It depends, again, on the person, like we said before. So with the hand warmers, you can either buy the hand warmer packs or you could get the electronic ones. Walmart right now, I don't know if they're still there, but I was at the Falcon Walmart and I found a hand warmer for $15. And I powered it up and it works. And it looks like it'll be pretty good. So I bought 2 of them, so $30. But when these hand warmers are like $1 a piece for a pack of 2, out of 30 times out in the cold where I'm using hand warmers, I'll have paid for my electronic one, and it'll work for several years. So something to consider about the different hand warmers. The one advantage that you have with the chemical hand warmers is some people have taken those hand warmers and that when their eyepieces are frosting up, because you tend to kind of breathe on your eyepieces sometimes, especially if you're wearing a mask, let me tell you. From experience, I know this. But what you can do with frosting of your finder scope or with your eyepiece is you could take those hand warmers and rubber band them to the outside of the barrel of the eyepiece or to the side of your Telerad or the side of your finder scope, and that'll keep the dew off or keep the frost off here in the wintertime. For us is when it's most of a big deal. So those are kind of secondhand, uses of those chemical hand warmers, which you can't do with the electronic ones. It just don't work. You need to have a regular dew remover for that. Other accessories, I don't know about Mead or Orion, but up on the upper left hand is a extension cord. I find my extension cord for my hand controller of my go-to computerized telescope mount too short. So a company called Scopestuff.com sells a cable extension for the Celestrons. Again, I don't know about other vendors, so I can't speak to them, but I really like having a much longer reach for my hand controller. Below that is a roller pad, looks like a yoga mat. Well, it's a truck foot locker liner. I found at Lowe's that it's just a sticky type material that I lay on the top instead of a picnic table cover. I put down this and it'll hold whatever is in place on top of my table. When my table's made of plastic, and anything that's on it'll just slide around. And this is more of a tacky type substance type of material that I can lay my books and everything down, and it holds it firm for as long as I need. So I like that, having a mount there. I have a office letterhead type of box that I put my books into. So again, they don't get dew on them when I'm not using them and things. They stay in the box. So it's just, I could put other stuff in there, like the flashlight and whatever else that it is that I need, I could put into that box. And if it starts to rain or snow or whatever, I'm okay. GPS, I already talked about early on, about you could buy the GPS, and that saves you from having to enter some of the data to get started. You could put both Orion, Meade, and I think Meade does as well, and Celestron all make a Wi-Fi adapter. You put this dongle onto your mount, and you can control your telescope with an iPhone or Android or iPad for that matter. Those things come around $100, $70, depending on who's selling them for your particular telescope. But they make it handy that you can control your telescope remotely with, from a Sky Safari, for example, on your phone or your iPad. Then you have an Orion eyepiece box is what I use. I pluck that out and put all my eyepieces and other accessories in this box, so I can close it up and carry it around. Everything that I bring with me out as parts go into that box for the most part. And then there's a Telrad riser. I have my Telrad on my telescope. The riser puts it up another 2 inches higher away from the telescope tube. That just makes it a little easier for me to lean down and look for those circles on the sky. So you also want to power your mount. Don't forget that, all this stuff, it's a computer, it takes power. So if you're not in your backyard where you can run an extension cable, out and control with AC power, they typically come with an AC power adapter, hopefully when you buy these telescopes. But if you're going to go to any remote location, say I like to go out to Rama State Wildlife Area, there's no power out there. You go out to Carville State Wildlife Area, which is even further to the east. No power out there for you to plug into. So you're going to need to bring something with you. What do you bring? Well, Celestron and some of the others, they make some lead acid battery 7-hour and I think it's 14-hour power packs. Don't really like those too well because the lead acid doesn't retain the charge very well, to where after a while you're going to have to crack that baby open and replace that battery, which you can get a replacement at Batteries Plus and do it yourselfer if you want. But the lithium battery packs, they're a lot lighter weight. They last longer. The battery life is maintained that if you charge it and then you set it aside and then you come back a month later, it still has a charge. Those lead acid batteries, you need to remember to put it on the charger every month to maintain them. So they have that disadvantage. But they do have limited functionality. They're only going to plug into your mount and for the most part be able to power your mount. There's other power options that are out there that people have figured out how to do. You can look on cloudynights.com is a website with a forum on there that people have taken lithium battery packs, for like car phone chargers, and adapted them to be able to power their telescope mounts. So that's a little more advanced in the do-it-yourselfer realm than just buying something. What you can buy is what I started with actually for my uses. I went to Walmart into the auto section and I bought a jump starter battery pack. And this one was about $130, $120. And it has that added benefit of if your car won't start after the evening, then you can jump start your car and make it home okay. So, and that's come in useful actually, as it turns out. A couple of times at Rocky Mountain Star Stare, I help people get their vehicle started wouldn't start anymore. You do not want to plug in your lead acid battery in your car, your automobile car battery, to your mount and power your mount all night long on your car battery, because that's where you're going to get into troubles potentially. And and the car battery's not designed for that. If you get into where you need a lot of power, a lot of people will go and buy a marine deep cycle battery or something similar to where, and then they'll have a power adapter to be able to power the mount in that way. So, but these jump starter battery packs are pretty nice. You can power up with the plug and do that. The bad thing is their battery life is limited. They're the lead acid batteries, so you got to plug them in once a month and charge them so they maintain their battery life. And when those batteries die, you got to figure out how you're going to crack that open and replace it with an adequate battery. So just be aware of that. And to go back on the hand warmers, Dave mentioned out that the Zippo hand warmers work really well. They can go for a run of 5 or 6 hours on a fill, and that's absolutely true and correct. And the downside of it, though, on that, Dave, I have to say, is that when those things go and start burning, they don't turn off. So you have to have a good place to put them until they run out of juice. So just be aware of that. But I've tried that too. So the next step. So now you have your telescope set up, you have it aligned, and you have the books, the tables, the gear. The skies are clear, and you're ready to observe, right? And as I mentioned at the beginning, early on in my talk, before you go out, do make a plan on what you want to see and observe, because that's really going to help you out with having an enjoyable night. If you're new to astronomy and don't have a lot of experience for what's up in the night sky, the moon and the planets are a great first object for first astronomers. When people are setting up their telescope and they don't know whether or not their telescope's even worthwhile to be looking at anything, look at the moon first, and if you get a clear view of the moon, you're going to get those stars are going to be sharp, and you're going to be able to see those other things. So the moon's a great first target to look at, and it changes. That line between light and dark on the moon changes like 50 kilometers per hour on the moon. It changes what it looks like every single day. So looking at the moon every day, you're going to look and see something different. So for that first month, anytime that the moon is available for you to look at, that's great to look. So check that out. Then bright stars or star clusters are great to start off with as well. I do want to add on back to talking about the books that I was talking about. Well, you need the star atlas. That's definite in my mind. Everybody needs to have a star atlas with their telescope. But then we talked turn left at Orion and the deep sky wonders, a celestial sampler like I have. But one other thing you can do, not as value added as it used to be in my mind, but you could get a subscription to Sky and Telescope magazine or Astronomy magazine, and they'll have articles in there about what is there to see in the night sky. What's the positions of Jupiter's moons? Can I see Saturn tonight? And whatever that is for that particular month upcoming, they'll have that assistance and suggestions for you of what to look at in the night sky. So if you don't want to invest the $35 for the book, think about investing the $35 or $55 for the subscription to the Astronomy magazine that's going to have that same type of information there for you. So or do both. That's okay too if that's what you want. A lot of people have. So what you might consider on planning your evenings under the stars, consider observing objects that you want to see that are in the western skies, and then as those set, then go further to the east so that you catch up basically with you want to catch those objects that you're going to want to see before they set beyond the horizon. And then you move towards the east so that you can capture those objects that you're going to have plenty of time in the night. Maybe it hasn't even risen in the east, or it needs to rise up above the worst part of the atmosphere and get high enough in the sky to have a decent observing and to look at it, which is another good point I should add for observing is try to look at objects that are at least 30 degrees above the horizon in any direction, so that you're not looking through a large portion of the atmosphere. So that's really going to help out your enjoyment of what you're looking at. It's perfectly fine. Yeah, you look at the planets and the moon and get excited about what there is to see. But when you're looking through 1.5 to 3 times as much atmosphere, when you're looking towards the horizon, as if you're looking between 30 and 90 degrees up, straight up overhead. So looking through that portion of the atmosphere will give you a lot better opportunities to see much clearer views of things that you want to look at. The other thing you could consider is observing objects in the same part of the sky. So pick Orion constellation, for example. There's a ton of different things to look in Orion, and look for, there's a carbon star down below, a couple of different carbon stars actually. Look for, you won't see Horsehead Nebula. Just tell you right now, no matter what, you could have a 20-inch telescope in dark skies, and you're probably not going to see Horsehead Nebula. It's just too dim in our skies to be able to see that. So, but you can't see Orion Nebula even with binoculars. So take a look at Orion Nebula and Orion. But there's some other things that you can look at up around Orion. Get into Gemini, look at Castor. You can follow us on our Facebook page, and one of our members regularly posts exciting things to look at in the sky. So also consider logging your observations and plan an evening under dark, light polluted skies. And I'm going to go real quick through this because I'm running over time, and apologize for that. But we already talked about what you can see: the moon, there's stars, there's lots of double stars, the star clusters, there's planets. Stars are fun to look at. Even when there's some clouds or some haze, you can still see the stars, where you can't see deep sky objects in those kinds of conditions. But when the nights are clear and crisp, and you can go out and see lots of different types of deep space objects like galaxies and nebulas and things like that. So where can you learn more? You can attend a Colorado Springs Astronomical Society public star party. Once we have those, we'll have virtual star parties up until we can have physical in-person parties again after COVID. You can ask questions on csastro.org forums or on our Facebook page. You can reach me at outreach@csastro.org. That's outreach@csastro.org, and I'll answer any questions that I get. I'll try my best anyway. I have a limited knowledge base based on my knowledge of astronomy and how long I've been doing it, since 2012. But I'm going to help you if I can. And then another thing you can do is team up, join our club, and then team up with a club member for an observing session. So what we do there is you could post on our forums or even on our Facebook and say, hey, I'm going to go out to the trailhead at the open space off of Dublin and Peterson. And anybody want to come out there with me, and you can observe together. And then if that person is more experienced than you, they'll point at an object and you can see where they're pointing, and you could point your telescope at that same object, or they could help you. You could team up, and if they have the same type of telescope that you have, or familiar with your telescope, and you're having problems, you could do some meetups like that, just one-on-ones or in small groups, and those can be fun sessions as well. And then also I recommend, there's a forum that's really popular with astronomers, tons and tons of knowledge out there. You can do a search going back years to find out, questions that you have probably have already been answered by somebody on there. And that's at www.cloudynights.com. You go to the forums there, and then into the particular area that you have a question about, and find out your answer. So that's a really great resource for astronomers, is that forum. So going back real quick, super fast, we would consider going to darker skies for your observing. And I didn't have any issue, using Mesa Overlook as my observing location for looking at Jupiter and Saturn setting behind the mountains during the Great Conjunction. That wasn't a problem because they're super bright, and I could see them in this red zone area, which I was in, pretty much red or orange in Colorado Springs proper. This is the kind of light pollution that we have here in town. But if I travel just a little bit east of town, down to Rama, Calhan, near the El Paso County fairgrounds, the paint mines, you're getting out into the rural sky area, this from between green and purple, and see how much more you can observe of the night sky with the naked eye. But then you put a telescope on that, there's a whole world of objects that you could see. It's just amazing when you're out in dark skies. So consider, if you can, to pack up your telescope into your car and take it and your family to a dark sky observing location. Our property, as a club member, you can go down to our property that we have for club members only, which is Gardner, near Gardner, Colorado, Starry Meadows. And it's a great place. It's in this Bortle scale 2 dark sky site. It's even not quite to the darkest skies that you could possibly get, but pretty darn good. We're near the sand dunes. The sand dunes will be in about that same darkness. This just gives you a quick kind of portrayal of this is what you're looking at as far as this scale then applied to the Front Range. So here in Colorado Springs, we're in the reds and the oranges, and you get out towards Rama, you get into this into the blues and purples. You get out west, it takes a little while for you to really get out west, on US 24, and it's kind of hard to see it on here, but you kind of have a long ways to go. You're about 11 Miles State Park, Wilkerson Pass, before you did it. Before you can get into dark enough skies. So here's a closer view of the Colorado Springs and light pollution that we have to deal with here in town. So, so that's it. Now, when you can go to local parks, most of them nowadays close at 9 p.m. So wintertime is a great time to go. I went to Fox Run last Saturday, and it was a nice dark park, and I was out there pretty much all by myself. But do consider going with a buddy for security reasons. That's one of the reasons why they're closing them earlier. But also be aware of park closing times, because some of those have gates, and they'll close the gates, and your car will be stuck there all night until the next morning. They will not open them back up. Garden of the Gods is a case where people have gotten stuck with their vehicles behind the gate and unable to get out. So just be aware. Some of those places that have park closing times. So, like many hobbies, astronomy can be simple or complex, and what you take up, how you take it up, is totally up to you. So, enjoy the thousands of hidden jewels in the winter, spring, summer, and fall skies. They change during those different periods. And familiarity with your gear and the right tools to have an enjoyable observing session is going to lead to years and years of fun. So join our club if you're not already a member at csastro.org. You have a join now. You can join via PayPal or send a check into our treasurer. And it's like $30 for your whole family. So join our club. If you don't want to join our club, just come to our meetings and find out what there is in the night sky. Come to our virtual events and activities and just see what there is to enjoy. If you're into astronomy, space science, and all of that there is to offer. And we all have fun doing this, and we hope you do too. So with that, before I go, is there any questions that we need to answer? Ron, are you on?
I sure am. There's only one question. It comes from the illustrious George White. He says, "Hey, Dave, if we wanted to attend a good big star party in the summer, what would be a good one?"
The best one that there is in the country, I think, which is Rocky Mountain Star Stare. And that's the, it just so happens that's the event that we...
Dave?
Yeah, there is. Thank you. rmss.org. Thank you. RMSS. We can put that in the chat too, I bet. Somebody can put that in there for me. So it is a awesome event. Let me turn off the share screen here. Oh, I guess I did already. Sorry.
You're good.
My, okay. All right. So, yeah, Rocky Mountain Star Stare. This one this year if we get through all of the restrictions of COVID, and we're really hoping that we can, and everything works out, we're going to have an Apollo astronaut there. I think his name is Walter Schmidt, Apollo 17, actually, Apollo 17. So I don't have, you can look on our website on what the whole plan is. It's what we planned for 2020. We weren't able to do because of COVID. We moved that to 2021, but we're a family-friendly activity. You can come. There's we have about 350, 400 spots available for people to come and be a part of it. But once those are all filled up and we don't have any room on our 32 acres for more people, we have to shut it down. But you don't even have to bring a telescope. You just sign up and, pay it. It's a cost of money thing, so we do make a little bit of money for our nonprofit to help us continue to do these types of great activities, like having Apollo astronauts come and speak to us and visit with us and sign autographs and do all those wonderful things. That also pays for, improvements to the land and our property and things like that. Pays taxes too, right? So, but you don't have to have a telescope. A lot of other people have telescopes up there and be more than happy for you to come by and have you look through their telescope, and they'll show you all the different things. So people out there with 20-inch, 18-inch, 16-inch diameter telescopes, or maybe somebody with upwards of a 30-inch diameter telescope that will be out there. So when you got a lot of astronomers with a lot of telescopes, you can come and after it gets dark, you can walk around. You don't even have to have a telescope, as I said. And sometimes I won't even look through my own telescope. I'll walk around and go look at what everybody else is looking at and look through their telescopes. That people that have spent a lot more money than I have on my setups. And sometimes I'll just look through my telescope and enjoy that. So it's a 4-day event, and it's in the middle of June. You can look on our website, rmss.org, and on the calendar, and it'll tell you all about what there is. And as we continue to work out the plans and confirmations about when registration is going to start and then we're going to be able to have it and so on and so forth, we'll let everybody know. So anything else?
That was the last question that we had from StreamYard Group. There's been a lot of comments back and forth, and a lot of great conversation, but most of the questions were covered in that chat, and you covered a ton of ground for people tonight, man. You did an awesome job.
Hoorah! I thank you, everybody. Thanks for dialing in. Thanks for spending your time with us. This is Dave Warner with the Colorado Springs Astronomical Society. So if you have any more questions, outreach at csastro.org or ask on our Facebook page. We'd be happy to further answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording that I've got going on this, because I'm hoping to be able to post this later. There's some people that weren't able to attend tonight, and I hope to be able to post that for everybody.
It's already posted. As soon as we end the broadcast, it will stay on Colorado Springs Astronomical Society's Facebook.
Oh, will it? Okay, great.
If anybody needs a link, we'll have it for I can get you a YouTube link to Stardom or Space Foundation.
Okay.
So we've got it in a couple different areas. If anybody needs
that's great.
What we'll probably do, Dave, is that you have the ability on YouTube now to be able to do chapters of a video. Since this is 2 hours, what we'll probably do is kind of chop it up by the way that you went through this, the different pieces of it. And then people can kind of click through to go the stuff that might be most important to them, like the stuff that you need to go out to stay warm. That's not a lot of stuff that people tend to think about.
Right.
Again, you have tons of great info tonight.
Yeah, and any of this, that if we want to repackage this in any way that we want to repackage it, for all of our uses, I'm more than happy to do that, or have it done, if you will. If we need to go and do a hands-on video kind of thing, that's what I was talking before the talk started tonight, was I have that capability now with the Canon M6. I can go out in my backyard and say, hey, this would, I'd set it all up and make that happen. So, or go out to Rama and do an observing session out there, with the camera running or something. So whatever it is whatever we need, we can work together and working that out. That whatever we need, we can work on, putting that out there. And that goes out to anybody that's still in the public, that's on here, that if there's anything specific that you think we should cover that would be helpful to you, or that you think would be helpful to others, I would love for you to provide those inputs so that we could do that. Because we want to create and put out good content. And even if it's just like a 10-minute video, 15-minute video, just doing these small little, pieces versus this fire hose like I did tonight, we can do that and make that. All right, with that, I'm going to close this out then. So thanks everybody for dialing in, and we'll talk to you later.
So awesome. Thank you, everybody.